So any questions from your discussions at lunch? If you did that, any questions, or from before, whatever you like, any questions on Zoom, any questions?
I have a question.
Good, come on.
So I live in Birkhead and have for a long time now. I was only supposed to stay there for 2 years.
Start again, you live where?
Birkhead. So it's just down half an hour
Okay.
from here.
Okay.
And I've stayed there for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's like a Pictish site, and next to it there's a well,
And
loads of quote unquote witches, herbal healing ladies.
yes, right.
Got chucked in the well and killed. And you
Oh,
know,
this is ages ago. When was it? When did that happen?
A long time ago, hundreds of years ago.
Okay.
But there's a lot of rituals that happen surrounding it, and there's a kind of energy around the whole Pictish thing that's still there. And the death of them obviously was horrific. It wasn't a nice death. Like we're talking about the peaceful death.
Definitely.
It was quite the antithesis.
Horrific, yeah.
Yeah. So then you think about what impact might that have on the area that I'm living in, with all of these souls that have had this horrific
Exactly.
experience.
Okay, let's just look at that. Okay, it's interesting. Okay, I understand. So if you think of this, take this view, the Buddhist view, because I know there are many interpretations from different spiritual paths, aren't there? All I can do is look at the Buddhist view. So the Buddhist view, there are trillions of there are trillions of sentient beings. Okay, so two, that they were humans, and one of the rebirths. So humans, we live on a certain place. So you're living there. Humans, and you've got creatures living there as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
So one of the things that was with a type of realm called spirits, which would be a very unhappy rebirth. And let's say if people, these witches, women, were chucked in there, it would not be, unless they're really highly realized spiritual practitioners, they're going to be intensely freaked out, aren't they? And so if you die intensely freaked out, you know, because there's billions of karmic seeds in there, that's going to attract, that'll help trigger a negative karmic seed, which could very easily ripen for them as a rebirth, as a spirit. And one of the ways, it's like ghosts, they live in that place, you know, if they're particularly attached to that place, then they could easily, so any energy we talk about that's around, there's the physical world, basically there's the physical world, the four elements, trees and houses and moons and stars, that's physical. And then you have the minds of sentient beings, and some the animals, the humans. So they could be, of course, yes, indeed, rebirth of some of those women could be still there from hundreds of years ago, because the spirit rebirth lasted a long time. It could be that. And that's how we talk about any. I mean, we know ourselves, we can say some places have really heavy negative energy. It's because it's heavy negative spirits around. Some places feel really radiant and blissful. That could be, you know, the Buddhist view would be there's the God realm. And that they aren't enlightened beings, but they could be very happy beings, very blissful. And often what, you know, some people talk about guardian angels. I know Finton, they talk about all kinds of different, people talk about different spirits and different kinds of beings, you know, around the animal, around the plants and things. They could be spirits, which are suffering beings, but they could also be the gods, which means they're happy beings, and they could be helpful, they could be useful. Or you understand? So there could be many kinds of beings, some suffering and some not. So this naturally creates, I mean, even just walk into some place, you're going to feel it, can't you? And it's because of the presence of certain sentient beings born there in these disembodied forms. Do you understand? So it could easily be it for sure. Doesn't follow, but it's them necessarily. But what goes on about there now? There's nothing particular that happens there now.
No, but the area is shuttered off.
It's what?
It's shut off.
The well.
Yeah, so you have to get a key to go in. So it's kind of like a historic.
What? It's got water there.
Well, it's a hole and there's water at the very bottom. It's very
But no one gets the water.
No one gets to the water.
So why is it locked up?
To keep all the spirits in. I'm not sure.
Why is it locked up?
It's peculiar.
Who locks it up?
There's
Who's got the key? Who's got it?
It used to be a neighbour that had the key, and then now it's people at the bothy, the cafe, they deal with the key. And
but why is it locked up? I'm wondering. Don't know the story of that. Interesting, yeah. But do people feel the presence of something? People talk that way?
My son does. My son.
What does he say?
He said that he wants to free all of the ladies that are stuck in there.
Oh, okay, okay. Because the story obviously captivated him. I understand, yeah.
But he says that he can feel it, but I just don't go there, so I don't really know. But I kind of wonder with the whole area having this history, and it's very close to my house.
I understand. I mean, definitely there's many beings around that we can't see. You can say that. Everyone's got different interpretation, but this is the Buddhist view. They're either going to be gods, which is happy beings, disembodied, and they could be very helpful. They could go bop around. They're like devas, they call. And the Buddhist view is they could be helpful to us. They could be useful, and the energy will be sweet around them. Otherwise, if it's a negative energy, it could be the spirits, the harmful as a result of attachment. They're very suffering beings. And they can be very harmful, especially to the one of spirits also can possess people. So when people hear voices. And they take it very seriously in the Buddhist views. It's an intense, negative, you've got very strong, like you could have very strong karma with a person, a human being who's very kind to you, or you can have a karma with a person who harms you. And the same, you've got strong karma with some beings who are born as spirits, and due to strong attachment, they can literally use your body to do their wishes. I mean, we hear that very common. That's spirits, and they're harmful spirits, not pleasant at all. Or some can be very tricky and say that they're like Mozart or something, and make you play piano. They're tricky. There's tricky beings. Mozart can be in some human forms, God knows where, It wouldn't be Mozart anymore. You understand? So it's just different ways of interpreting them. Yeah. Okay. What else, people? Some questions? Anybody got questions from this morning's chat? Karma talk? Nothing?
There is something online from
Oh, yeah.
Danielle.
Danielle,
I
yeah,
have
good.
question.
Yeah. Okay, sweetheart, talk to me.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Right. This is something I've always wondered about, and I couldn't quite get my head around it, about karma.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, you're familiar with the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes.
Yeah, and that story where the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, and when Arjuna says, I don't want to go into battle because, on the other side of
I don't want what? I can't hear so well.
Sorry, I don't want to go into battle because the other country I'm fighting, my uncles are there, my teachers, they taught me, and now you're asking me to go and fight them. And I can't remember precisely all the dialogue, so please forgive me, but I know that Krishna comes about with he says something about, this is your karma. You don't want to fight or kill your uncles or your teachers, but we are at war with them, and this is your karma. So I've always struggled with that. Can you explain that to me?
Is that what happens in the end? He does the fighting?
I think he does, yeah, because it's all part of
Okay. I understand the point. So I think first of all, there can be different interpretations of karma, but very strongly what that means is basically, okay, put it like this. It's a bit like, if you think of karma as sowing seeds and then seeds bring fruit. And let's say you walk into a garden and there's all these, every day you walk in, there's these, like, it could be good karma or bad karma. Let's say it's bad. Let's say it's weeds, and weeds are just flourishing so strongly. You don't want the weeds. You didn't plant the weeds, not now anyway. And you wonder, all these weeds are ripening. Well, that's like saying, oh, well, this is botany. What to do? You sowed the seeds in the past, and now these damn things are flourishing like crazy. So that's what it means. The seeds are, for this person, the seeds from the past karma, from having done actions like this and having actions done to him like that, the karma between them is so strong, the seeds are so strong that it's like theoretically you're in prison. It's like you're locked in prison for 27 years. It's due to your karma. The heavy karma is so strong, you haven't got the key to get out. You have to experience it.
Right.
And that's why when the karma is very strong, negative karma, at least if you're going to experience it, because you got no choice, because it's going to so strong, the karma, the seeds are just ready to burst into life, which you planted. You've then got, if you're trying to practice, you would then accept those and you would do your best to navigate it and not create more negative karma as a result of having to go through it. Do you understand? Or it's like a bit, so you go to the doctor and you've been smoking for 27 years. And then she says the cancer's about to burst into life. It's just too late to catch it. That's possible. That's karma. You smoked all those years. What choice do you have? You got to just act. It's got to act out now. So at least if you have experiences of karma, you don't just sit there passively. You take responsibility for it. You don't blame others, and then you try to not create more negative karma as a result of it, and see it as good, and see that you're purifying. And even the one of having to fight. What to do with that one? That's kind of intense, isn't it?
It is.
About that. But then
what would happen then? So he goes in and he fights and he kills. So does that mean
that one? I'm not so sure about that one, because if you're really trying to practice the way we're talking here, your karma is to have to be on the battlefield, but you can still go against the urge to kill. You might just accept to be killed. You wouldn't want to continue to kill. You wouldn't want to do that. That is if you don't see, that is really how karma works. That boy, see that boy who was a fisherman, the little boy, I mentioned the story, he didn't have any choice but to kill because he didn't know he had a choice. But if you have a choice, then it's really intense. You're so attracted to fishing, but you make a decision, I don't want to do it, so you struggle against it. That's still possible. But this little fisherman didn't even know the option. He just followed his karma, you know. You're like lemmings, you just follow it, you act it out. Virtuous karma is the same. Like, you know, you created so much, let's say, generosity karma in the past that you just, money comes to you. You're not even doing anything to deserve it. Just money's pouring into your bank. You win the lottery. People give you money. Your business is successful. Well, that's karma. You created it, you know, so you own it. Of course, that's happy karma. You do good with it. You don't do it out of greed. You see what I'm saying? So I'm not so sure how to interpret that one, that he had to kill. No, you still, that's the thing. Karma can be very strong. You got the karma to get cancer, which nobody wants. Work with it and try to change it. Or you have the karma to continue to kill. If you're conscious of it, you try not to kill. You wouldn't just act it out. Not from the Buddhist perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's just always been a hard one for me to get my head around.
That's why I would disagree perhaps with that interpretation. Especially the point is, the ones, if you've got the karma to be born a person who is then, you know, conscripted into the army, and you've given a gun and you're really good at it, but you never know there's an option. You don't know you've got a choice. Then then that's karma. But if you've been told it's karma, and you, in a sense, that means you've got a choice. No matter how hard it is, you can choose. You might have to go to the battlefield, but you can choose not to kill. So that's why that part I don't understand.
Okay.
Especially when you know it's that. That's when you can work with it and change.
Yeah. Yeah.
That part, maybe that's the Hindu view of it.
Yeah, maybe.
When I hear the Hindu view of karma, it's a bit more concrete. It's a bit more set in stone. Like you've got a choice, you know, like that.
Okay.
That's what I'd say to that one.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
you. Thank you.
The one of karma, I think, is so hard for us to understand or to accept, because what it does is put every single person in the center of their own experiences. Because the strong, I think we look at it, the strong feeling of ego is that somehow we're, especially, I think philosophically, especially if you really do believe that you are made by someone else. I mean, I always crack jokes about this and it sounds hilarious, but my feeling, that's a really heavy view for the Buddhist view. That you know, and if you either believe God made you, or you believe your mother and father made you. I mean, you truly, the materialist view is actually, you are this literal innocent victim. There's no you from the previous. You are this brand new person that your mother and father literally make and chuck you on the planet. That's the weirdest idea for Buddha. I mean, no wonder we've all got victim mentality. No wonder we blame our mothers. No wonder we want to sue our parents for all the evil. No wonder we have this view of, I didn't ask to get born. I don't deserve it. How dare you do that to me? It's not my fault. That's the voice of ego. So the view of karma is completely, that's total nonsense. That's literally made up nonsense. It's the way ego works. This view that I'm an innocent victim who didn't ask to get born. That's heavy duty. And frankly, that is the materialist view. I'm not being rude to anybody. That is literally the materialist view that runs the world, that prevails in the world, which we literally take as a truth. In other words, it's true your mother and father did give you a body, but of course, if you think, that's the point, in the materialist view, you are only the body. They don't posit anything else like even a soul or anything non-physical that isn't the physical. You only are the physical. So if that's true, your mother and father did create you. But the Buddhist view is that you've got a consciousness and that they did not create. Your consciousness, your mind from before, entered into that egg and sperm. And your mother and father merely provided the egg and sperm. They did not make your consciousness. They didn't give you a mind. They don't give you psychosis or love or compassion or being good at music. They are yours. And this is the radical difference between the Christian, the creator religion, and the materialist one, that you bring your own stuff with you. It's a tremendously different view, you know. So in that sense, we are each of us responsible for every good or bad thing that we do, that we think, that we say, and that happens to us. It's a very different view. I find it marvelous. I love it. I wish every day I'm attempting to practice. And it's hard, but it's powerful when we can. because it completely changes the victim mentality. If you try to apply that every day, you literally take responsibility for whatever arises in your life. As Lama Zopa says, everything that we experience is our own karmic appearance. So even, it sounds a bit cosmic, but it's very powerful in the Buddhist view that whatever appears to us every day, whatever you see, whatever comes into your life, whether it's creatures who harm you, whether it's people who give you money, whether it's beautiful rainbows, whether it's ugly, disgusting smells, the physical external world, also the way it appears to us, how we experience it, where we're born, that's due to our own past karma, our own actions. We are our own creators, in other words. It's a very powerful concept.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So you said last night that our consciousness follows us all the way through all our life, right?
Well, it is our mind, and we've got the body and the mind, everything, and then when we die, it leaves that body and then finds a new body.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm interested if the Buddha has because it has to start from somewhere. So the consciousness has to be created right at the very, very beginning. So somebody has to spark and create this consciousness in order for it to be a part of us in our first life. And I'm wondering if the Buddha has an explanation for where that might.
I understand that. Yes, he does, and he says that the concept of a beginning is a completely meaningless concept. That everything, that minds are beginningless. This is very shocking. We always assume there's a beginning. So your consciousness, it seems so abstract to us, but the Buddha's view, he's observed that everything is driven by the law of cause and effect. Okay, that this, if it exists, it comes from something before, and if that exists, it came from something before, and if that exists, well, if you think that through, you can't ever get to a first moment. You just can't. You can't find a first moment, because what was the cause of that? So now in the Christian teachings, there's very extensive philosophy teachings about explaining that there can in fact be a first cause, and they call that God. That's the expression in creative religions. So the Buddhist view doesn't assert a creator. Therefore, and this is where the Buddha, I mean, in the text, there's all these philosophical discussions the great yogis and meditators have with each other about this very concept. And the Buddha would say it's just not viable, not possible to have a thing that doesn't have itself have a cause. So you, by definition then, which is weirdest to our minds, as you just said, we assume there has to be a first moment. It's just something completely instinctive for us. But he says that's a complete misconception. Consciousnesses are literally beginning. And in fact, universes are beginningless. This is a very different view, and it's very fascinating. I mean, it just seems so odd. So, because we all know, where did it all begin? Where did it begin? Where did I begin? Where did it begin? When did karma begin? Everything, we assume it, we say it with such certainty, just like you said. Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. Because if it's cause and effect, and in theory, it sounds reasonable. If you say cause and effect, then whatever exists at this second has to be, by definition, the effect of a previous cause. So you, as no matter how far back you get, you say, well, maybe there, but what caused it? And that's I remember when you're being a naughty child at school. Well, miss, who created God? I mean, you're not supposed to ask that question, but it's a very good question. That's my point. And the Christians have very extensive teachings on how there can be a first cause. The Buddha would disagree. So your consciousness is beginningless, as nutty as it sounds. And even universe, I mean, the way they talk, they don't go on much about it. But for example, at the moment, like here we are in a human realm, human rebirth with these bodies, basically they'd say, and they don't go into this, and I'm always interested in what they says. I haven't studied all the texts. I mean, I haven't studied 90% of the texts, but I try to think about it. So if this universe, this world that we know, that we talk about as the human realm, the planet Earth, and all the universes that we know about, that we talk about, then if you go far back enough, there was a point when it didn't have human beings here. It's pretty clear, isn't it? So then you have to think, well, if human minds, because human, animal, spirit, hell, they're just labels for a certain kind of mind, a certain type of experience, right? And so if they've always been human minds, and the key thing about a human birth, the thing that defines us as a human is our virtue, is our goodness. We've got the delusions, but our virtue, they're the human characteristics: kindness, love, compassion. And then, so if you track that back, before this human planet, well, where were human minds then? Where were humans living? Well, the Buddhist view would say, they talk about this, how the human birth before this planet was a much more subtle rebirth. Humans were more advanced, They only had virtue, they only had wisdom. The physical energy was like subtle light, a bit like the God realms, but there was an immense amount of virtue and it was easy to get enlightened. You'd have a life that lasted 1,000 years, but it's not like we're talking now, like humans, So what happened, basically, they said that began to generate, and then the delusions, the imprints of delusions like attachment and anger were all there, and then they gradually began to manifest, and that polluted the physical energies that made them more polluted, and then eventually that came more and more, and then it's like karma's like personal evolution, and then eventually we started getting born as a human on this planet looking like a bunch of apes. I mean, how they talk about, they all say humans have the same amount of DNA as the animals or something, isn't it? So it's a degenerate times, they say, this human birth we have now looking like a bunch of animals, whereas before it was a more subtle type of rebirth. But they don't go into much. I don't know what books that's all written in, because if minds are beginningless, realms of existence, because anger is beginningless, love is beginningless, jealousy is beginningless, delusions are beginningless, and by doing these actions, they affect our physical energy and create the type of body we're going to experience and the type of environment we're going to experience. So I don't know, but certainly beginningless, as nutty as it sounds to us. I mean, we say, but there must be a beginning. Buddha says, no, misconception. Cause and effect, denies it. Okay, that's an interesting point, isn't it? What else, people? Questions? Anything else to talk about?
Was it a first Buddha or are they beginningless too?
Well, I mean, there have to be. There just has to be. They talk about this eon of time that we're in, which includes thousands of previous lives. This is the 7th of 1,000 Buddhas. I don't know. I mean, I get confused with all that stuff. I haven't looked at any of it, but they say that. But they have to be. They have to be. They have to be. How can they not be? They have to be. They have to be. That's all I can say. It just sort of blows our minds to think that the concept of beginningless. It seems a very curious one. But until our minds get more advanced, we won't understand it, I suppose. So, okay, what have we talked about so far? The mind and karma, the main, how we create actions. So seeds in the mind. So then one of the ways, as I said, to this first level of practice, this practice of harnessing the energy of our body and speech, behavior, body and speech, the servants of the mind. The most beneficial way to live a life of good ethics is to live within the vows of good ethics. These vows of not killing, not at least they say, that's how they talk, which makes sense if you think of it that way. And then, and what that does is help kind of weaken the tendencies to kill, steal, and lie. And as you said before, somebody create a new pathway, that's a really good way to put it. Create a new pathway. So, okay, this business of wisdom. What Buddha's saying is that in general, the main cause of our suffering are these neuroses in the mind, these delusions in the mind, these afflictions. And why they're the cause of our, so right now, the very having of them is causing pain. We know that if you think of anxiety and attachment and jealousy, just right that second, it's painful. But his broader meaning is that on the basis of those very self-centered, panic-stricken, fear-based, I-based afflictions, they cause us to do and say things that harm others. That's really the essence of it, And they sow seeds in our mind that then produce the future suffering, the types of rebirths, the tendencies, the experiences, and the environment. So we're kind of locked in this sort of cycle if we follow the delusions. That's why your point about the bugger, what do you call it? The bugger, what was it? The bugger what? Who? That one, she said, yeah, that's right. So to keep following, to say you're karma, you've got no choice, that's a problem, that one. That's why I think that's it. I don't disagree. I don't agree with that one. Then you've got no choice. Then you're stuck, you're locked. It means you can never change. That's from the Buddhist perspective, it's not possible. So the very first level of suffering is when the bad things happen. So from the bigger picture point of view, the first kind of suffering is the suffering, being born in the suffering realms. But also, as I said, that can also manifest even in a human realm when the bad things happen as our experiences, and then things that go wrong. You know, we all know that kind of suffering. That's the suffering of suffering. So the very first level of practice, where Buddha exhorts us, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, that's to solve that problem. If you stop creating the causes of future suffering, if you stop killing and stealing and lying and harming, which are the causes for my future suffering, then at least you quit that level of suffering. You'll only, on the bigger picture point of view, you'll if you continue to live good ethics, you'll continue to be at least reborn as a good human being. And you'll have, you know, if you live in the vows, you'll continue to be born as a human being with a good life, with a good family, with good conditions, with good environment, with good friends. No bad things will happen to you. You'll have all the resources you need. You'll have good tendencies. You'll be joyful. You'll be compassionate, and you'll keep creating more of that. But you can go further, the Buddha would say, and that's where we get to we can now go to the second level of practice, the second stage, where we conquer the second type of suffering, which is more subtle. And this one is harder to see. So this is called the suffering of change. So we look into the Lam Rim, this packaging of the teachings as we know if we're studying. This is where we now look at the mind itself. So the Buddhists, so basically, again, from the realms, from the different realms point of view, this is referring to the human realm and the God realms. So if you want to compare with the lower realms, they're more happy. There's definitely more happy. But from the Buddha's point of view, they're still in samsara and they're still in the nature of suffering, but more subtle. And so basically, now again, from the point of view of being born a human, then the experiences that we have that are the suffering of change are what we call happy experiences. So the suffering is when the bad things happen, when you get harmed, when you're sick, when people are mean to you, when you lose your job, all of these are the suffering of suffering. We know these really well, and they're the only ones that we call suffering. When we think of people on the planet who suffer, we think of them. The animals who get harmed, the humans who get harmed, who are suffering, who are sick, who are poor, blah, blah, blah. But the Buddha says, no, even the ones, even having, even having happy experiences, the type of happy experiences we have, they're also in the nature of suffering, but at a subtler level. So this sounds initially quite abstract, but let's look at it. And the cause of all this, the first cause of the main kind of suffering is the harming with our behavior. This kind of suffering is caused by the delusions themselves, in particular attachment. So basically, looking at it this way, the suffering of suffering essentially is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. When your hubby's mean to you, when you stub your toe, when you're poor, all the whole spectrum of terrible things that happen, let's say, to humans, that's the suffering of suffering. And all those are the result of those sentient beings, those humans' past negative actions. So then you've got the second kind of suffering. He calls it the suffering of change. And from the Buddhist perspective, what that refers to is what we call happiness, which is when the good things happen, which is when attachment does get what it wants. So when attachment doesn't get what it wants, that's called the suffering of suffering. But when attachment does get what it wants, for us, that's called happiness. And relatively speaking, it's happy in comparison with the suffering of suffering. But from the Buddhist perspective of the final goal, or actually Buddhist perspective of having no attachment, which we can accomplish, it's still suffering. So let's explain. I'm not trying to make it complicated. So given that we're driven by attachment, this is the point. This is the source of this understanding. We are driven by this emotional hunger, driven by dissatisfaction, driven by always wanting more, driven by continually wanting this and wanting that. And then when we don't get it, we call it suffering. And when we do get it, we call it happiness. But Buddha says it's a limited happiness. It's a contaminated happiness. It's short-lived happiness. There's still a quality of happiness. It's true, but it's limited. He says we're capable of a deeper, broader, bigger, more profound happiness. A happiness that doesn't rely upon getting objects of attachment. That's the way to put it. So this is explained in the teachings, and the Hindus discovered this, that when you know, that the mind in its nature, when there is a state of mind, and this is a Hindu view as well, of the mind where it can be super blissful, super clear, super, free of attachment, therefore free of aversion. Like I said, when somebody asked, what's it like to be having no attachment? If you just merely on this planet didn't have, attachment, therefore you wouldn't have anger, you wouldn't have depression, you wouldn't have anxiety, you'd be, in your nature, you would be blissfully happy. So you don't need to rely upon cakes and boyfriends to get happy. Right now, with attachment, we're driven by getting the object of attachment to trigger any pleasure at all. We can't just sit here and get happy. We know that. We go mad in 2 minutes. So we are dependent upon getting what attachment wants in order to trigger happy feelings. It's true. We know sometimes you wake up in the morning, you just feel happy, but it doesn't last long. Your body gets distressed. You need food, you need sights, you need sounds, you need smells. So having this human body of the 5 senses completely is fraught with suffering, because you need to get what in other words, attachment's like being a junkie. You've got to get the junk to subdue the poor attachment's needs. So that's the suffering that's the suffering of change. There is happy feelings that does come from getting cake, having nice sex, getting the music. But we all know, and this is scientific, not religious, it doesn't last. You know that. The Buddha's basically saying if cake or bodies or the 5 objects of the senses are the main cause of happiness, then it's logical, the more cake you eat, the happier you get. The more sex you'd have with your boyfriend, you'd never stop. You keep getting happier. But we know it's not true. We know it is the exact opposite. It's something simple, really, but we don't like to hear it. It's too painful. And because we don't know happiness that lasts, we know it changes. And what it means is it changes from happy feeling to unhappy feeling. So we know the lot is so clear with the cake. There you are minus cake, feeling a bit distressed. That's the suffering of suffering. So you go, oh, what am I going to do to fill up the gaping hole? I've got to get cake. Attachment, driven by attachment, there's hunger, there's emotional hunger, never satisfied. So you get the cake. It looks divine. It does, and it hits your mouth. It is delicious, and it does trigger a pleasant feeling. It triggers pleasure. There's no question. But you know what? The tragedy is, there's many parts of our mind, like I said, and I'll go into this in a minute, describe happy and unhappy feelings. It's a kind of very specific meaning in Buddhism. But we know it means happy feelings. Happy feelings arise when you get the cake. There's no question. But what's happening, attachment's right next to it. And attachment's expecting, hungry, craving, anticipating, the cake finally gets in the mouth. Happy feelings are triggered. Happy feelings come. But attachment says, Robina, not enough. Have another mouthful. I'm still not satisfied. It's a little junkie inside us. So you already got pleasure, but already you're hungry. You're anticipating the next piece of cake. We know that. So you put the cake in, hoping for more happiness because you're not happy. You're not satisfied yet. Then we all know that the happiness is going down. And before you know it, you've had 4 pieces and you want to vomit. Where's the happiness? It's all gone like a dream. We know this is true. It's not being sarcastic. Buddha's not trying to be mean to us. He's trying to point out what's fairly evident if you look at it. So it is pleasure. It is happiness. And we can have it. And you can have, some people can have incredible happiness in this life due to past virtue. You can have a life that really where your mind's mainly happy because good things always happen. You have beautiful husbands and lovely children and lovely food and you've got a nice personality and the environment's beautiful. People can have really happy lives. It's true, but you analyze it more deep. It's totally dependent upon getting those objects. So it's like the junk is really good junk. You know, it's really nice heroin. And you always got it when you need it. you know, and you're very relaxed about it, but you only can get the happiness by getting the junk. That's the happiness we have now. And of course, it's all we know in these human bodies. We don't know anything else. It seems silly to even think there's an alternative. But the Buddha says, yes, he has discovered from his own experience, through certainly getting a single point of concentration, before you even realize emptiness or get out of samsara, that the mind in its nature, when it's more subdued and more subtle, when it's gone beyond the conceptuality, beyond the grosser level, beyond the sensory to a more subtle level, the mind is just blissfully, naturally joyful. It doesn't need to have contact with objects of attachment. That's the point. He says, no, you people, you think happiness is what you get when you get what attachment wants. No. Happiness is what you end up with when you've given up attachment. That's the meaning of the suffering of change. The pleasure changes into suffering. And it really is basically, the attachment is like a junkie mind. It's the junkie. You've got to get the object to get any pleasure. And the pleasure we're talking about is sensory. You know, even to get mental pleasure, there's mental and there's physical, mental and physical, mental and sensory. So the sensory is dominating us. We know that if our body doesn't have nice feelings every second, we get very distressed. The tiniest stub of your toe can upset you, which is sensory. So we want pleasant feelings in the body. And we know as we get older, you get arthritic and the things and the pain, it becomes terrible because you're not getting pleasant feelings, you're getting unpleasant feelings. So the body dominates us. But then you have mental happiness, mental happy feelings. They're the ones that are really important. Because the point about the Buddha always, in the teachings, it always says, you know, or Swami Zopa says it, the happiness we do get can't grow. And this is the one of the senses, is we know it's true scientifically, like I said before, that pleasure in the body, the pleasant feeling of the physical body, the pleasant feeling that is triggered by contact with a sensory object. It can't last. It can't grow. We know that, because if it could, then the more cake you eat, the more pleasure would keep getting better. And we know it is literally the opposite. Literally the opposite. The best sex on the planet, with contact with that object, it can only turn into the most disgusting pleasure, the disgusting experience. We know that's true, but we don't analyze it. So Buddha's pointing out that our consciousness, our mind, you know, can access subtle levels where you can still be in a human body with that, and you have given up attachment, you've given up craving, you've given up anger and delusions and anxiety, because they are what pollute the mind, causing there to be such pain. Whereas you've given those delusions up, you've finished those delusions. Well, you can't literally until you realize emptiness, actually, but pretty much radically you can give up. And that's what the God realms are. And from the big picture point of view, it's those God realms where you're like, this is what heaven is, blissfully joyful. And it lasts a long time, but it doesn't last, it runs out, because you're still in samsara. So the same in the human level, much more limited. So even a person who's, relatively speaking, gone, you know, hasn't got attachment, hasn't got anger, hasn't got anxiety, these are possible, then they don't have the suffering that we're talking about here. They're not going to be craving the food and craving the sensory objects, because their minds are already happy. This is the thing he's talking about, that he's discovered. And so then the third kind of suffering is even more subtle, and that's it's called all pervasive suffering. So that one, as long as you're born in samsara, you can either have a suffering rebirth or a pleasant rebirth. but it's still going to be fraught with suffering. Attachment is going to be there, and suffering of one kind or another will be there. Whereas when you give up altogether the root delusion, when you give up the main delusion, the root delusion, the maripa, the ego grasping, and that's when you realized emptiness. That's when you've cut the root of all suffering. And that means you don't even need to be reborn at all. You've finished rebirth. You're out of samsara. That's removing the third level of suffering. So by practicing in the Lam Rim, the first level of practice, you stop the grossest level of suffering. By practicing the middle scope, you quit the suffering of change, and by realizing emptiness, you quit samsara altogether. That's how they talk about the three kinds of suffering. So the second level of practice is, having harnessed your body and speech, at least refrained from doing harmful actions. And then also you can extrapolate from that. Buddha, in his little list of 10 things, doesn't say don't eat 7 pieces of cake, but you kind of get the message. He at least says don't harm others. They're the worst level. But at least then you'd also begin to control your body and speech in relation to your ordinary actions of following attachment. You'd calm your body down in relation to attachment. You'd learn to practice being content with 2 bits of cake. You'd learn to be content with a little bit of money. Not just following attachment intensively. But then when you get to the second level of practice, you're able to work with the attachment directly. And this is way more subtle and much harder, but it's all part of the practice, So that means we have to understand what attachment is very, very clearly, because how can you give it up? How can you counteract it if you don't know what it is, This is why the first level of practice is fairly clear. The attachment to the objects of the senses. The very first level of practice, you harness your senses. In the second one, you begin to harness the attachment itself, and therefore, of course, the anger and the others, because they're all driven by attachment. That's where you learn to know your mind well. You learn to become your own therapist. You learn, literally, we have to learn to be content. So this is where it's a mental thing. This is a point about, I have to make the distinction, you see, in Buddhism between the sensory consciousness and your mental consciousness. This is a really crucial point. They don't talk too much about it like this, but this is really important. So, for example, because the body's so dominant for us, as Lama says, we make the body the boss, It's huge for us. It completely dominates our lives. So, okay, so now this is where this Buddhist model of the mind, we've got the negative states of mind that we've been talking, attachment, anger, ego grasping, all of these. Then you have the virtues, positive states of mind. So in general, what Buddha's saying is, when you follow the delusions, in the long-term result is only future suffering. You'll kill, you'll steal, you'll lie, you'll have more attachment, more greedy, more grasping. You'll never get satisfied, just following the delusions. So at least at the beginning, you stop following the action. You stop doing the actions driven by the delusions. And the second level of suffering, second level of practice, you begin to work with the delusions themselves, which is much more subtle. So then when I talked about there are 3 levels of states of mind, the negative, the positive, and this third lot, the mechanics of the mind. So this is a curious one, but I want to talk about it. So that when we talk about happy feelings, pleasure, happy feelings, unhappy feelings, they are alternative words for those are happiness and suffering. So when we think about suffering, because we're so dominated by our bodies, when we think suffering, we think of the event, don't we? The bad weather, the mean boyfriend. But actually, suffering is in the mind. Suffering is a sensory. Okay, in the third category, of states of mind, you've got negative, positive, and these neutral ones, but I call them the mechanics. Oddly enough, in there, not oddly, but it's not how we talk. There's a state of mind in there called feeling. not as an alternative, not as an equivalent of emotion, not like that. Feeling, literally, bare bones. Every millisecond, we either have a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, or an indifferent feeling. Well, forget the indifferent ones. Let's focus on the pleasant and the unpleasant. So when you have the cake, one, there's dissatisfaction, which is attachment, which is a delusion. That's a delusion, attachment, emotional hunger. You crave, you think of the cake, get excited, anticipate, get the cake, and it's got to get in the mouth. We know that. That's where it's got to get finally. Don't put it in the ear. You don't just look at it. You've got to get it in the mouth. We know that. So that's attachment. That's in the first category, a craving and attachment for the object. Then what we're wanting, what attachment is driving for, is not really the cake, but is the pleasure, the pleasant feeling that the cake will trigger. That's really what attachment is craving for, the pleasant feeling. So that pleasant feeling, that's a type of state of mind in the third category. It's in the third, it's a mechanical part of the mind. It's not a virtue, it's not a non-virtue, it's just the way minds are. Every millisecond, any being in the universe in all realms of existence are either having pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feelings. It's just the way the mind is. It's not negative, it's not positive, it's not bad, it's not good, it's just how it is. So either pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, or neutral feeling. Well, forget the neutral ones, okay? So we all know we are craving the pleasant feelings. That's the only reason you want the cake. We don't know how, in other words, we don't know how to have a pleasant feeling unless we have an object. That's why we're so gross. We don't know how to trigger pleasure, pleasant feelings, happiness, unless we get the object. That's the suffering of samsara. So there's the negative state of mind called attachment, this emotional hunger, this craving that believes totally that the cake will give me the pleasure I'm missing. We crave that pleasant, we're craving all the time pleasant feelings, tactile through each of the five senses, aren't we? The five senses. We need to get pleasant feelings. And that means we have to have objects of those five senses, because it's the only way we know how to get a pleasant feeling. We know that. And we're talking the senses here. So we also have pleasant feelings in the mental consciousness. Like, for example, you see someone who's happy, and you feel happy in the mind, not your body, but your mental consciousness. That's a mental moment of pleasant feeling. And they're the ones that can be, as Lama Zopa says, they are the ones that we can grow. You can't grow pleasant feelings from the senses because they don't last. We know that. If they did grow, you'd keep eating cake and you'll get happier. But it's the mental pleasure, mental happiness, mental pleasure. That's what we have to cultivate. And the Buddha would say that's what the meaning of happiness is. And so what causes that long term is doing virtuous actions. So if we practice love, we practice kindness, we practice generosity, that sows karmic seeds in our mind that will literally ripen in the future as a lot of mental pleasure. Our minds will be very happy all the time. So really we have to distinguish between a delusion and unpleasant feelings, because they're completely different, but it's almost impossible to distinguish. But technically that's how it is. And distinguish between love, for example, and the pleasant feeling. So when you love somebody, you want them to be happy. At the same time, you're attached to them. And at the same time, you touch them or kiss them, it triggers pleasant feelings in the body, but it also triggers pleasant feelings in the mental consciousness. But they don't last if we rely upon that object. So what the Buddha is saying is we need to learn to develop pleasure, pleasant feelings in our own mind from our own practice, which is practicing virtue. Practicing love, practicing kindness, practicing actions based on those is the cause of future happy feelings. Happy feelings. And they can be grown. And the Buddha is saying you can get those by working on your mind. When you get concentration, go beyond attachment, your mind was blissfully happy. I remember interviewing Venerable Renee, one of our monks, who's a serious meditator, like 45 years, 50 years now, that often on into retreats for years and years. I interviewed him in the mid-90s about his meditation retreat on getting single-pointed concentration. And he said he maybe got to the 5th of the 9 stages they talk about. And he said, basically, roughly speaking, that the pleasure, his mind, not his body, He would have had that too. The pleasure, the pleasant feelings that his mind experienced in his own meditation. No access to external objects, no access to anything of the external senses, not at all. But in his mind itself, the pleasure was so superior to any pleasure he had ever experienced through his senses. That's what the Buddha's view is. That this potential for joy, for bliss, for happy feelings is the nature of our mind. That's even before you realize emptiness. The mind has the potential to be extremely joyful. And the cause of it, well, is giving up attachment. And the cause of it is practicing virtue. That's the Buddhist analysis. In Lama Yeshe's book, Mahamudra, which is a particular technique for realizing emptiness, a meditation technique, which is dependent upon this single point of concentration. They often don't do that in the teachings, but he always wanted to encourage us modern people to know the potential we have. We're talking here, the potential of our mind to be joyful. And he describes a little bit in the book, the qualities of your mind. It sounds like science fiction to us. He says, even before you've got fully developed single point of concentration, but the mind, first of all, when it's more subtle, when it's beyond the gross level, beyond the sensory, beyond the gross mental, all the conceptuality, the mind is so, he says, so, it's like vast as you can imagine, as if you can count every atom in the universe. And he said, literally use the words, utter joy, rapture, ecstasy. They use those words. It sounds hilarious to talk like that. That's the natural state of a mind when it's unencumbered by the senses, unencumbered by the grosser conceptuality. That's what these Hindus invented. That's how they discovered that. And the Buddha took it further. Because he said they didn't go far enough, That's the potential of our mind. I mean, we don't have that. There's no way in the planet neuroscience talks like that. But our mind has this astonishing potential for pleasure, for joy, for happiness. But if we say the word pleasure, it sounds like a sin, doesn't it? Oh, we can't have pleasure. That sounds too bad. Happy sounds okay, but pleasure, no, come on. We're so kind of, and even with respect, I mean, I was a Catholic, we say that God made us, and that's why, you're not allowed to have such pleasure unless it's called a sacrament, isn't it? It's called sexual pleasure, sexual union is called a sacrament created by God. So you've got to have God's permission to have such pleasure. I mean, I think that's a bit ridiculous, quite frankly. Are we communicating here? Or am I talking weird words? Just my opinion. Because you can't have such pleasure. You've got to have God's permission, isn't it? That's why it's a sin to have sex outside this sacrament, isn't it? It's very interesting, isn't it? I think it's kind of weird. Anyway, whatever. Are we communicating here or am I sounding weird? Are we communicating?
You never sound weird.
What?
You never sound weird.
Oh, I'm sure I do. Anyway, okay, so let's look at this a bit, this type. So in the mind, we've got negative states of mind, neurotic, delusional, ridiculous, rubbish, attachment, anger, fear, jealousy, all the nonsense. We've got the virtues, which are our saving grace. Then we have this third category that are neither negative nor positive, but are crucial. And one is intention, attention, concentration, good memory, discrimination, and the one called feeling. And this is massive in Buddhist psychology. That's why Buddha plucked it out and presented it as one of the 5 aggregates, It's a hugely powerful state of mind. And it's just there naturally. It's just there naturally. It's the nature of mind to have either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feelings. And we only want the pleasant. Nothing wrong. Everybody wants happiness, he says. So happiness, when we say happiness, like I said, we're so addicted to the sensory objects and we're so addicted to the senses and the body that when we say happiness, we think of the object, we think of the event. But happiness is not in chocolate cake. It can't be. Happiness is not a characteristic of a handsome man. Happiness is not a characteristic of a delicious house. It is not a physical component. Happiness is a state of mind. It's called a happy feeling, triggered by, in samsara, by houses and bodies and cakes and boys, But finally, it's not in its nature that we can get it ourselves when we've given up attachment. It'll be there naturally. Naturally, you'll be naturally joyful, naturally, all the time. And that just sounds too weird for our minds in the West, you know. So happy feeling or unhappy feeling, forget the neutral, okay? Forget those. So we know we only want the happy ones, and you can have them either in the sensory consciousness or the mental consciousness. The ones we want to grow, that can grow limitlessly, are the mental consciousness. So that joy, so then as Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra, that, you know, in the beginning, when your mind more subtle, the joy you experience is sensory. There's no question, nothing wrong with it. But eventually, as your mind gets more subtle, it is only mental. The sensory has completely ceased. And so the sensory is also joy. And when you've got this ability to have joy in your life, it's also sensory as well. Your body, they say when you've got single point of concentration, you know, you've got this incredible, they call it pliancy, physical your body just feels so blissfully happy all the time. Your sensory consciousness through your body. You've got capacity for incredible pleasure, joy, but it's not berserk pleasure. That's the one thing they say. It's very peaceful. Now we know when we have pleasure through the senses, even when you're thirsty, isn't it? You're hungry for that water, just for a mouthful of water, your mind's berserk. So the pleasure we have through the senses, the mind is very uncontrolled, very berserk, you know. That's how Lama puts it. But when you've got pleasure, when your mind is released from attachment, you're having physical pleasure all the time. It's not berserk. It's peaceful. And the pleasure mentally, the mental pleasure is totally peaceful, totally calm. And I think this is unusual for us. When we talk about pleasure, it's mainly sensory. It's always overexcited, kind of berserk, you know. And then we go crashing down to despair, up and down like yo-yos. So feeling in the third category, pleasant or unpleasant. So they are referring to actual our mind. They are referring to our mind. But because when we have attachment and you visualize the cake, you see the cake, you taste the cake, that's so dominant for us, we think not only is that the cause of happiness, but we even remember it as being the happiness. What do we have memories of? You think about it. Not the feelings in here. We have memories of the event. When you think of something really terrible, suffering, you remember the event. That's what arises in the mind, the event. But but happiness and suffering is in the mind. It's mental and sensory. It's mental and sensory. It's mental. It's the mind. It's not out in the cake. The cake's this construct that our mind makes up. We rely upon to trigger the pleasant feelings. And we're completely addicted to the outside, you know. So the cause of happiness, broadly speaking, that means a happy state of mind, but it also means in the future lives, you'll get a really healthy body. You'll have really happy feelings. You'll have a really virtuous mind. You'll have really nice experiences. People will be kind to you. There'll be rainbows and lovely weather and lovely things. So all your karmic appearances will be pleasing, but the pleasure is in the mind. The external events trigger, you know, and bad things won't happen to you. So you practice virtue and you give up attachment, you'll keep getting blissful lives, happy lives, nice experiences, nice food, nice tastes, nice people. Everything will be, it can only be nice. It can't be bad. You won't get a bad experience. It's not possible. We have to create that. It's not just luck. It's not a gift from somebody. It is the result of our mind. We are the person who does it. We are the person who causes it, you know. And that's why we're getting more advanced in our practice, and we've still got some negative karma left, and it keeps ripening. Bad things will happen. Your hubby will die. Your hubby will leave you or something. Then when you're working on your mind, you can change your interpretation of it. That's the really powerful level of practice that actually really is taught in the Mahayana component, where we talk about transforming problems into happiness. And that's very much rooted in the most advanced teachings of wisdom, which is the root of the thing, which says that things don't have an intrinsic nature as good or bad. They don't have an intrinsic nature as good or bad. So we can change our interpretation. We can use our suffering experiences as part of our path, you know. We can interpret them differently. That means we can own them as a past karma. We'll take responsibility for them. We'll know they appear bad to us. And we have aversion for them, but we can change our attitude. That's for me, like, for example, the people I have in prison. I work with people in prison for many years, not so much now, but some of the best practitioners I've known are people in prison, in these garbage dumps, when things are horrible, sounds are garbage, the food is garbage, you're treated like garbage. But because you're working on your mind, you literally change your whole interpretation of it, and it becomes, you learn to use it as your path, you know. And that's a really powerful level of practice that we can all do. So pleasant and unpleasant feeling. It's not the same as love. It's not the same as attachment. But it's also subtle. We can't hear the difference. Because when you have that cake, you're experiencing attachment. Now, a person's a better example. When you love your child, your beautiful baby, you've got a strong karmic connection with that person. They come to your womb, they're born to you, they come out of the womb, they're totally divine. There's strong connection between you from past karma. You adore that person, which means you have love for them, which is a virtue, but you also have a lot of attachment for them. They appear divine to you. That's what attachment does, makes them look divine. Attached to them, you think of them all the time, you adore them, you attach. There's attachment, there's love, and then there's pleasure. So attachment in the first category, delusion. Second category is love, and third category, there's one of these simple states of mind called pleasure. But we almost can't distinguish. When you have a happy feeling, we can't distinguish it from all the rest. Just it's so pervasive. Until we really know our minds really well, it's hard to distinguish, you know. That's why when you read about like someone like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's said to be a highly realized person, you know, beyond delusions. He had a stroke in 2011 or something. And the way Venerable Roger talked about it, because he was in Australia, and we're in a big teaching that was there, and I was there, and he was taken off to hospital. And then recently, because as he passed away, they asked me to write the eulogy, like a eulogy, to have to interview Venerable Roger, interview people about Rinpoche. And it was really very moving to write about it, because with Rinpoche, if he can take that he is highly advanced, doesn't have attachment, doesn't have aversion, realized emptiness, and has bodhicitta, a really highest developed practitioner, that means he, and this is seen from what Venerable Roger said, that his experience in the hospital was so unusual. He never even acknowledged. I mean, for us, it sounds a bit like mental illness, you know. He never acknowledged that he had a problem. He suddenly started to become weird, and he couldn't talk properly. He had a stroke, and he was like laughing. They took him to the hospital. Him and his attendants hung out with him there, and he never mentioned it. He never asked a single question of the doctors. And initially, Venerable Roger, I think, said the doctors thought he was mentally ill, because he just was beaming all the time, like really unusual. Most people, when they have strokes, they're kind of distressed. The family are all distressed. It's really traumatic. He's slurring like a drunk. He can't talk properly, you know, but he's laughing. He never asked a single question about his illness. He had to do all his exercise. He wouldn't do them for a while. He'd never discuss. When he discovered, like when he had to do his water therapy, he'd do it for a while, but he'd give up in the end and just say mantras to blow the water. And then he discovered all the sheets in the hospital are laundered and everybody shares them. So he's blowing mantras on the sheets for everybody else. And you see a photo of him even with his stroke after a few days. He can't, you know, he's right side down. He can't speak properly. He's looking radiant. I mean, it's almost hard to imagine this. What do you mean radiant? Why would he be happy, for God's sake? Because these people are somehow, this type of experience, they use it as grist for their mill to encourage them to have more love and more compassion for others. And because they've realized emptiness, which things don't have an intrinsic nature, they can't get caught up in it. So even though on the face of it, there was physical pain, he wouldn't have interpreted it like that. It's hard to imagine this, you know. Forget even realizing emptiness, but just having that level of compassion. I remember one Lama talking about some level of bodhisattva. On the bodhisattva path, the compassion wing, the stages and stages of cultivation of this level of great compassion that they develop and this wish to benefit others, and it increases and increases and increases. And it's at some level bodhisattva, I forget, they talk about 10 stages of development. For that bodhisattva, he said, the action of cutting off his hand and feeding it to a starving animal is as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. That's what they'd say. And that's, normally speaking, in our normal psychology, that sounds like serious mental illness, doesn't it? But that's a person who's completely controlled their body and speech, has given up attachment and all the delusions, and even given up the root delusion, and has realized there's no intrinsic I, no intrinsic other, and has developed this phenomenal levels of compassion. It's hard to conceptualize that. It's hard to imagine that. So lovers ever seem to show that aspect. Joyful, even, and Venerable Roger said he really felt that that experience of that stroke even increased his compassion, increased his bodhicitta, you know. It's hard to imagine for us ordinary people. But it's encouraging, if we study the path, to know that technically it's possible. This understands why it's important, I think, to understand the mind, the way we're talking, the different kinds of states of mind, their function, what they are, how you can do this. It's not just mystical. It's not just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best, you know, not like that. But way to go, one step at a time. And so there's one about, you know, things that have an intrinsic nature. That's the final stages of the wisdom wing, the really powerful level. And this is really where we're starting to uproot the root delusion now. Then you start to really see that things are the invention of our mind, you know. Even when we understand attachment, that attachment is emotional hunger that then projects all this, we project it onto the object, that causes the object therefore to appear totally divine, like that chocolate cake. We know it's like that, don't we? There it is on that plate. And when we see it, you know, what appears to us is something truly delicious. And of course, we believe that that deliciousness is in the cake, as if you put a spoonful of deliciousness along with the chocolate and the flour. It appears like that. It doesn't feel, does it, as if our mind is playing any role at all in that appearance. Equally, after 6 pieces, when it now looks disgusting, we don't realize that it's our aversion projecting onto that cake, you know. So this already is proving that things don't have an intrinsic nature as this or that. And this is the powerful method that we need to apply to help us understand how we can transform suffering into happiness, meaning we can reinterpret it. It's why my friends in prison, you know. Learning to, like my friend Mitchell, for example, on death row in Kentucky, known him for 25 years, 28 years now. You know, he's involved in drugs back in the 80s, and he got they had guns. If you have guns, you're going to die, guaranteed. So then him and his friend put into prison, given death sentence. You know, he's still there, and he's been a Buddhist since about only 30 years, 25 years since I've known him. And so he's transforming his life. He's living in this shitty place, you know, big old blue stone building, boiling hot in the summer, freezing cold in the winter, on death row with all these guys. All the death row people live together in their red jumpsuits, locked in their cells, terrible food, really restricted, you know, no rights to do anything, no pleasure. Senses are already deprived so hugely. But he's got a really devoted practice, and he's very funny and easygoing, and he's very kind to all the other guys, all the crazies on death row. So you can say he's become a really happy, mentally happy, not sensory. The garbage dumps. I mean, the weather there is appalling. They don't have AC, they don't have heating, freezing in the winter, boiling in the summer. So that's the cause. By giving up attachment to the external things, what you develop is the ability to have mental happiness. You learn to become content. Contentment is mental happiness. You get that when you give up attachment. You're able to be happy no matter what. That comes from giving up attachment. What he's practicing to do, he's got no choice. You know, he's living in this garbage dump with a death row over his head. Anytime ready for an execution. I'm ready for that electric jolt, he says. So there's mental happiness and sensory. And the one we want to cultivate is mental. And that has to be consciously done. We rely on happiness just from the senses. That's when we become junkies. That's when we're up and down like yo-yos, when we're totally miserable, totally distressed, no control, shove the food in, shove the alcohol in, shove the sex in, shove the video games in, demented, distressed, never happy, not realizing that happiness is a mental state. That's what we have to cultivate. And that comes from practicing, thinking differently. It's a conscious decision to literally reconfigure our thoughts. That's the cause of happiness. So having virtuous thoughts, giving up negative thoughts, that brings mental happiness, which really simply is contentment. Contentment, satisfaction, contentment. You know, that's happiness. That's happiness. So we have to cultivate it. We have to practice it. As long as, yes, we have to practice being content. That sounds weird to us because we think it comes when you get the cake. We're convinced of that. But we know it doesn't when we look. We can practice. And one of the key ways to practice is starting being content with who I am right now. Practicing it, literally thinking those thoughts. It's a cognitive process, you know. You don't wait for happiness to come. You have to create it mentally. Then whatever happens out there, you'll be fine. That's the point. So make this distinction, and what I'm talking about here is the distinction between the sensory and the mental. And the mental is the one we have to practice. That comes from conceptual thoughts. Practicing, interpreting things differently. I'm okay. I'm doing my best. I'm doing a good job. I'm moving forward. I rejoice in my practice. I rejoice in this. And then you practice patience in relation to your hubby and he's slurping his coffee. You practice kindness to your sister. All of that practicing virtuous thoughts is what brings mental happiness. I think we know this. We just have to be more confident in the process. Because discontent just brings more discontent. Relying upon sensory pleasure is a nightmare because it turns into pain, guaranteed. It's the nature of the senses. Questions? Yes.
Well, just first evening, you mentioned some tools and meditations that would really help with practicing non-attachment.
I know. So it's like, okay. If you're a Tibetan Buddhist, for example, if you're a Tibetan Buddhist, your practice would have a whole bunch of components to it. So it'd look like this. Let's say you're committed to the path, you've taken refuge, and you've got your lay vows. So your practice, that's part of your practice already. Do you understand? Just even living in the vows, when you feel you're ready mentally, you formalize your commitment to being this Buddhist, this path, and then you take the vows. Already that's in itself, that's a powerful practice, helping you work on your mind. So roughly speaking, and then you decide to do some practice every day. And we all know discipline is helpful, you know, deciding a bit, and it gives us the feeling we're doing something. So you've got your vows already, which is tremendously powerful. Already as a practice itself, just living in vows is a pretty powerful practice. You understand my point? That is no question putting atomic bombs under the tendencies to follow attachment and aversion. It works at a subtle level. You're not going to see magical difference in yourself overnight, but it's working at a very deep level. So you'd have confidence in that. But then in the mornings, you'd try to have a disciplined practice. You'd get out of bed. You'd have an altar, like some kind of surface that has a Buddha on it. This is a reminder, you know. It's like we need these types of things. We're sensory beings, you know. You have a nice altar, and we'd have we have another practice that's making offerings, and that's always traditional in Buddhism. And you have to understand the logic of that. That making an offering is, again, it's like creating the cause to be close to this path and the Buddhas and the wish to be blah blah blah. You'd say a few prayers where you'd take refuge. You'd have this thought of this compassion. Then you might do a 5-minute meditation. Then you might have taken a practice from Tantra, so you might have a mantra you'd say. So you build up these little pieces. in a morning and an evening practice. Then in the evening we have a purification practice, which we can do. I'll leave this one. So you have these little pieces, and all of them together have their own particular function, but they're all together the job of doing what we're talking about. And of course, it's a gradual, slow process. So some people, like my friend Venerable, this monk I mentioned, as soon as he heard the teachings, he knew he wanted to jump in the deep end. So he became a monk, and he's doing teachings and study and had vows, and he went off to the mountains for years. Now, some people do that. Some people won't do that. We're all our own level. But it's basically, keeping in vows itself is already a tremendous practice. That's not typical, because many people think of meditation. But without, the Buddha would say, this view here that lamas would say, without living in vows, you don't have much strength. Because living in vows puts tendency, it like I said before, it purifies the tendencies to just follow your senses unceasingly, and it helps purify your mind at a more subtle level. So that really is a major piece of your practice, and you delight in doing it. You'd be happy to do that. Then you have something in the morning, and then and then again, if you want to go further, you might go and do courses and you study the stuff, because that's helpful. Some people like to do that, and I want try to do a little bit of that. Not much. I've done less than I thought I wanted, much less in my life. But study the teaching, so you get a sense of the meaning of it all, put all the pieces together, it helps the mind. And then you'd have practice in the evening where you would do purification. And that's really, and you build this up as you go, and you'd add components as you go. But I say the starting point, if no one's ever done a single thing from here, you'd walk out. The first thing to do would be having this confidence you can change your mind, that you have got potential. And you'd start some little simple one like watching your breath in the morning and making a decision, I'm going to make the most of today and try and watch my body and speech and try and not jump on everybody and catch my mind. And at the end of the day, you might just do a little practice and go to bed. That's a good start. And you go more. As you progress, you go further and add pieces. Do you understand? And I think the discipline is a key one. That's why we all fall down. We're all lazy. We kind of get all excited. Then I can't be bothered. Do it later. And before you know, you've lost the plot. Oh, what happened? Where's my practice? We all know that one. Do you understand?
So if we have, there are Buddhas, if we've practiced Buddhism for like 2,500 years, and people have practiced, where are they? There should be millions of them.
Buddhas.
How could Buddhas like?
But there are.
How can I see them?
I know that's the thing. That's the thing that sounds like tricky, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So okay.
Because I
I think the answer is pretty simple. If you have never heard of tennis, know nothing about tennis, and know nothing about a person called Roger Federer and the capability of a tennis player, right? You've never heard of it. You've never heard of tennis. In some countries, you won't have heard of tennis. And even so, then if you were to meet Roger Federer, you just see this nice bloke, or you might see him an ugly. You don't know. You will never see a tennis player, will you? You can't. It's not possible because you don't know tennis. But as soon as you know the theories of tennis, you go, oh wow, there's a tennis player. You'll recognize. So if you don't even know the meaning, okay, the difference here is this. Okay, the big difference here is this. When you're a Buddha, as you know, when you're a Buddha, what that word really refers to your mind. And when you have fully achieved Buddhahood, the actual Buddha is that enlightened mind, as you know, called the Dharmakaya. That's Buddha. That's actual meaning of Buddha. And that mind pervades the universe. It is wherever there is existence. It has infinite wisdom that sees everything as it is. It sees the minds of all. It has infinite wisdom, infinite power, infinite compassion. It doesn't need a body. It's out of samsara. But because of compassion of that person becoming a Buddha over countless lifetimes, they will manifest as a body. Okay, tennis is easy because it's in a human body. But Buddha, who can see, even if you see the Dalai Lama, he's an example on the earth that they all say, as we know, that they say he's a Buddha. But you can't, what's the Buddha mean? A Buddha by definition doesn't have a body. So how can you recognize a Buddha? It's impossible. It's sort of like they're highly realized beings and they come down to our level and appear with 2 legs and 2 eyes and 2 noses or whatever it is. That looks like a human being. That's a human being. You'd never see Buddha in a million years. You might see a nice person. After 70 years of running Tibet with all his dramas and suffering, anybody on the planet who's got half a brain will see he's a nice guy. But that's about all you see is a nice guy. How can you see a Buddha? It's impossible. It's impossible unless you're clairvoyant. That's the reason. Very simple. You can see a nice person, but Buddhas also can be kind of grumpy. They can manifest as grumpy and mean. Because, you need to manifest in different forms for different sentient beings. But Kandala, for example, you know, one of our lamas, Kandala, this lady lama here, Lama Zopa says, my first lady lama, he said. He only got one, and he got about 47 men. He's got this one lady lama, and she's also his lama, and he's her lama, so they're kind of mutual. It's very nice. But when she was a little girl, Lama Zopa said she was born as a fully enlightened being, amazing being, Vajrayogini. And she came to Tibet when she was a little girl in Tibet. She was desperate to come to Dharamsala to meet His Holiness and to do all these different things for His Holiness. And she got there. She was a little girl. But every time she see the Dalai Lama in the car, going down the street in a car when he's going somewhere, she'd faint because she saw the Buddha. She saw the subtle light, this subtle light body radiant, and she looked like a silly girl. She'd faint or collapse, you know. She saw the Buddha. She had clairvoyance. So she saw an enlightened being, even still in the subtle, not even in the Dharmakaya. She saw the Sambhogakaya, the light body. She saw that one. And they all thought she was crazy. And I remember she was desperate to get to see His Holiness, but who's going to listen to some little girl, you know, nobody, on her own, tumbled over the mountains at the age of 14 or 16 or something. So then she met one Lama, Courtin, and he said, and he could see who she was clairvoyant. He said, I will build a golden bridge between you and His Holiness. So she eventually met His Holiness. Anyway, whatever, I'm just talking. So a Buddha, by definition, can't be seen, because that's an enlightened mind. But they take on a body consciously for the sake of sentient beings. And because they're an enlightened being, they say they manifest in different forms. So one of the things, when you become a bodhisattva, by the time you become a bodhisattva, you do the first step, you control your body, control your speech, you live in vows. Then you go to the second, you control your attachment and your delusions, you get rid of those. Then you go to the third one, and you become this amazing being full of love and compassion. And at some point you achieve this incredible paradigm shift in the mind, where you become this bodhisattva, this person who's totally committed. It's not what the West would call a saint. It's crystal clear, incredible level of love and compassion, where you're now committed to only become a Buddha. And no matter how long it takes you, life after life after life, you will never give up. And the other one is it's this shift in the mind where you only think of others. This shift has gone completely. You've transferred self-cherishing into other cherishing. You only think of others. So there's then, once from that stage, and once you realize emptiness, there's 10 levels of development. And even the lowest level bodhisattva, who's realized emptiness, has the capability already, and this sounds like science fiction, has the capability already to manifest in 100 different bodies simultaneously for the benefit of sentient beings. Their power is so tremendous. So the thing is, because they're beyond delusion, they're beyond grasping, they're beyond attachment, they don't have delusions anymore, they're finished, they're out of samsara, but they're being reborn out of choice. You're choosing to be reborn to help others. You don't need to be reborn, you're finished. But you're choosing to take human bodies and to continue your path on the bodhisattva path to become a Buddha. Then even already, because they want to benefit all sentient beings, they're going to use different methods to help others. So the best method is to be sweet and kind. But what about the tough-headed people who can't be helped? Then they manifest in a wrathful body. They will transform their anger and use anger to help others, to benefit sentient beings. They're going to all be able to manifest in whatever body is necessary. So I remember, because what bodhisattvas are trying to do from life to life to life is connect with human beings, connect with sentient beings, make a karmic connection, because you're not going to meet a person if you don't have karmic connection with them, and they want to lead them all to enlightenment, but they're not ready. So you've got to accumulate this kind of, you create this karma with all these sentient beings, so when they're ready to be led to enlightenment, you'll meet them, and you'll drag them off, to enlightenment. So they're manifesting in countless bodies, but it could be a wrathful body, could be a peaceful person, could be a wrathful person, depending on the person. So they're able to utilize attachment, they're able to utilize anger purely for the sake of sentient beings. That's the point that's hard to see. So, it's like tough love, they're able to use tough love. Your mother has told you 4 times, no more chocolate. She has to shout at you next time. I told you, no more, go to your room. So you think, oh, mummy hates me. No, she doesn't. She's using tough love. She's driven by compassion. So these holy beings can't be driven by anything but compassion. They can't be. The delusions are gone. So they will do whatever it takes to get you, to hook you, to benefit you. Remember when my mother met Lama Yeshe? She was kind of upset by him. That Yeshe, she said, oh, that Yeshe. He watched the television while I was talking to him. She's upset by him. But I had this feeling that Lama somehow hooked her. They talk about how you hook. So she talked about that Yeshe. And I remember thinking, oh God, she's criticizing a bodhisattva, whatever. I remember there's a story I heard from old Lama. There's a story about this bodhisattva going from life to life, looking like a regular Joe. They don't walk around with halos. You can't tell they're a bodhisattva. You can't tell. They're like a regular human being. It could be the homeless person down the road. How do you know? It's your clairvoyant. You cannot see a Buddha. You cannot even see a bodhisattva. You only see what we're capable of. Our eyes are too limited. Our mind is limited. You might see a nice person, but you can't see their mind. So this bodhisattva is going from village to village and hooking people long-term, life after life, accumulating virtue, accumulating merit, meditating on emptiness, perfecting his mind to become a Buddha life after life. So he'd hooked everybody in this village, the story goes, you know. But this one old lady didn't notice him, and he couldn't leave her behind. He needs to make a karmic connection with people. If you've got a karmic connection, you've met them in the past, you're guaranteed to meet again in the future when you're ready. And then when they're ready to be led to enlightenment, you can lead them to enlightenment. This one old lady didn't notice him, and he couldn't leave her behind. So he discovered she had this beautiful garden. So he rode his horse through her garden, destroying it. Now, excuse me, he's not saying, hello, I'm a bodhisattva for the sake of this old lady. No, he just acted like a maniac guy. They probably chucked him out of the village, but she now noticed him. He got her. He hooked her. She's shaking her fist and shouting and yelling. He couldn't leave her behind, so he used wrathful methods to hook her. For my mother, I thought, okay, Lama Yeshe used wrathful methods to hook my mum. You know. So when she died, I rang Lama Yeshe immediately, and because he'd met my mother, he was able to help her at the time of death, you know. So you can't recognize bodhisattvas. I mean, we know ourselves, even among ordinary people. You see some person, you have no idea what they're like. We can go by their behavior. The best we can do is go by their behavior. But we can't see their minds. It's not even possible to see people's minds. Impossible. Of course you can't see a Buddha. What do you think?
Yeah.
And we've got to understand the path and the logic of it all. It's not mystical. You know.
So they can be there even when I don't recognize them.
What?
They
Say it
can-
again. What?
They can be there even when I'm not.
Of course,
able to
I mean, that's the
recognize them.
point. I mean, if you think, if you take this path seriously, and all I'm doing, I'm trying to take it seriously. I don't know if it's all true. I'm trying to work with it. The best I can do is repeat what I know and try to take on board, like you are, you know. Then it's clear. Even the lowest level bodhisattva, you can't tell. Because I mean, if you look at someone like Dalai Lama, it's sort of evident he must be something special. You can't, if you don't know the Buddhist teachings, you won't be able to articulate it. Like if you don't know tennis, you might see Roger Federer looking very handsome and lovely, but you don't know tennis, you can't articulate. What are you seeing? You don't have the theories. But anyone can see he's a nice guy. You know, and after 70 years, he even tries to sound you can see he tries to sound ordinary, but you can tell he's not really angry. He's not pretending, you know. So you can see he's something special. People see it. But to say that there's your Buddha, that's impossible. That's impossible. Impossible to know. Do you understand? Are we communicating here? I mean, you've got to sort of look into this whole path, and it's all there in the literature. You've got to kind of understand, and therefore, if you know this as a basis, and that's why when you have we'll discuss tomorrow, that's why when you have a teacher, the ideal is to see them as a Buddha. You don't know they are. You can never prove it until you're clairvoyant, until you're a Buddha yourself. But it's helpful for our mind to see them as a Buddha, because then the advice we get is as if it's from a Buddha. It's skillful. It's psychologically skillful, you know. Do you understand? And that'll leave you today.
There may have been a question on.
Oh yeah, good. What is it? Who is it?
Vivian?
Viviana, yeah.
Come on, who is it, Viviana? Talk to me, sweetheart.
Hi, Venerable.
Hello,
Hi,
darling.
very happy to
Happy
see
to see
you.
you. Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be able to explain in English my question, but I try.
Good, darling.
Please, could you suggest me how can I go more deeper in my purification, Vajrasattva? I don't know why I feel in this period I need to go deeper in my
Okay, will you be here tomorrow?
What?
Will you be here tomorrow?
Yes, I'm here.
We'll talk about it then.
Thank you very much.
I want to lead the practice tomorrow and talk about how we purify karma. I'll do that. Okay?
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, sweetheart. Thank you, Viviana. So thank you, everybody. Jangchub Semtrog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Yuchig, Ke Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gondu Pava Shog, Gewa Di Nudu Dag Lama Sange Drubgyo Ne, Droa Chikyang Malupa De Yusara Gopa Shog. All right, people. So anything that's useful, even 1%, I'm happy. Do your best. All I can do is try to pass on what I've heard, what I know, what I'm trying to put into practice myself. If it's useful, I'm happy. If it's not, I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you.
so much.
Thank you, everybody.